If there's one thing we can count on streaming services to do, that is to spend billions upon billions of dollars each and every single year, not only to generate new content, but to market to new prospective subscribers out there. They spend a fortune on this. It doesn't matter if it's Disney Plus, if it's Netflix, if it's HBO Max, Paramount, Peacock. It's all the same. They all have to spend money in order to make these businesses grow. And today, or at least a few days ago, is we're going to have this discussion from Puck Magazine and Matthew Baloney talking about Disney having a huge problem in the streaming wars. And this talks about some of this spending and how they operate. And it's not just Disney that has this. I think it's across the board, but Disney may have a particular weakness. We're going to talk about this article. But before we do that, we are going to talk first about this. A very different mindset when it comes to the streaming wars, and that is from current Discovery CEO David Zaslav. Now, if you're not familiar with David Zaslav or haven't really watched this channel before, he's somebody that we have been following, as David Zaslav will be helming the new Warner Media Discovery merged company once AT&T's CEO John Stankey spins Warner Media off from AT&T later this summer. David Zaslav will be helming this new behemoth merged between Discovery and Warner Media. And David Zaslav is a very different thinking type of guy when it comes to running these types of companies. Of course, Discovery, relatively small compared to Warner Media, but Discovery also doesn't have anywhere near the content spend. They do a lot more reality television type programming, but they have very, very high returns, have a very good business, and a very loyal audience. David Zaslav is going to be looking to do that with Warner Media once he gets his hands on that property as well, finding economies of scale and getting Warner Media back, hopefully, to a little bit more sound footing. We're going to talk about that as well. And today, for all of this discussion, I have with me my good buddy, Kamran Pasha, once again. So stay tuned. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. Good to see everybody out there, and joined once again by my buddy Kamran Pasha. Kamran, how you doing today?
I'm well. It's been an intense week. It's made my hair turn gray. It's pretty intense.
I wish I still had that much hair left to turn gray. What I do have is pretty much there. So, but everybody watching, make sure you follow Kamran on his Patreon page. A link, of course, will be in the description below as always. And like we always like to mention at the beginning of these videos, if you are like one of the 60 or 70% of folks watching this video, maybe the first video you've ever seen on this channel, welcome aboard, first of all. And secondly, please make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. That's really important so you can get notifications if you hit that notification bell too when we put out new videos. Make sure you share this sucker out on social media, and do leave a comment before you head out the door today. So Kamran, we have a bunch of things to discuss.
Yeah.
All about the streaming wars, and we've gotten some interesting articles, two in particular, in the past few days. One, of course, that we have up on screen now that pertain to the recent earnings report that came from Discovery Networks, helmed by CEO David Zaslav, who is also soon to be, if all things go according to plan, he will be the new head honcho of not only Discovery, but of Warner Brothers, of Warner Media, once the Reverse Morris Trust spinoff happens, where John Stankey of AT&T will spin off Warner, merge inside of a trust with Discovery, and have a new entity come out the other side. And we'll see a brand new streaming service coalesce together between these two powerhouses. And Zaslav, and I keep going back and chuckling that I think it's no accident that somebody like David Zaslav, as opposed to Jason Kilar, who's certainly the head of the bigger studio of these two. Let's face it, HBo Max is a much bigger dog than Discovery, but it's going to be Mr. Zaslav that is going to be the king of the hill when this is all said and done. Now, whether Mr. Kilar is still around at the end of the merger is, I think, right now still up for speculation. I would guess probably not.
My instinct is he's going to move on. They're going to use him as the fall guy. They're already using him as the fall guy for the decisions that Zaslav needs to happen, like Jeff Zucker being moved on from CNN. So he's already, all we're seeing is true reports in the news about how angry CNN employees are with Jason Kilar. Not a mention of David Zaslav, on whose behalf this is quietly being done, right? And so Mr. Kilar is going to be the fall guy. That's my instinct. And he's gonna get a very nice payout, so he's okay with that.
Oh, I'm sure he's going to be very well compensated, as most of these guys and girls typically are with their golden parachutes. But Zaslav is coming in, and we've talked about Zaslav before. He has a very different attitude, and that attitude reared its head again during their earnings call. As you can see here, the quote at the top of the article: Discovery CEO speaking in an earnings call said of the merged firm, quote, "We want to compete against Disney and Netflix, but we are a very different company." So we're going to talk about what that means. And then we had another article come out from our friend Matthew Baloney over at Puck, a wonderful Hollywood insider attorney over there, had a great piece talking about the differences between something like a David Zaslav and something like we have at Disney and Netflix that spend like drunken sailors, and how that may not be a sustainable model. So we're going to get to that. Stick around because there's some interesting stuff in there. But some of the high points of this, he talks about entering the final stages before the deal closes in a strong financial position, which, in fact, they had a pretty good earnings call. Zaslav told the analysts that we plan on being judicious, but our goal is to compete. And this is the key. Our goal is to compete with the leading streaming services, not to win the spending war. And that's key. We've talked about this before, like when we talked about the Disney stuff, how much money that Disney, and not just Disney, but Netflix, HBO Max, all these other guys out there committing tens of billions of dollars to content creation each and every year combined. Disney alone talking about, I think, spending somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 billion in the next year. And Zaslav has a very different approach. Of course, Discovery Networks has a lot more reality programming, which means content that comes in at much lower costs to produce, but are still very well watched, very well received shows.
Very popular. And I mean, you can make bad reality shows. That's the important thing with Discovery is you can make, there's lots of bad reality shows all over the place. It's specialized on reality shows that people want to watch. So it's focused on two things: cost control and audience demand.
Indeed, it does. And like, I'll be watching Monster Hunters again tonight with Renegade Jr. He loves that show. And that's on Travel Channel. That's one of the Discovery Network families. So, there's a lot of good stuff on there. Or Mountain Monsters. Mountain Monsters.
That's a fun show. I was just watching. I love
five rednecks running around West Virginia in the woods looking for Bigfoot. It's just funny. It's fun.
Bigfoot and all that. And I watched all those shows. I was just watching last night. I was watching their one of their haunted shows. Destination Fear did a special documentary. I mean, I'm on Discovery Plus every night. I'm on it every night. So that says something. So.
Yeah, and they, obviously Discovery does not have, they don't have the revenues, they don't have the amount of profit that some of these other companies have, the more mature ones. But they are still very profitable, which is something that Disney Plus itself is not yet, and is not slated to be until 2024, according to Disney. So they're still running in the red. Just real quick, not going to get into the nitty gritty numbers on here, but just $3.2 billion in total Q4 revenue. This is for Discovery. Increased 10%. They added another 2 million subscribers to their roster.
In 1 quarter. Wow.
In 1 quarter. Yeah. Is very, very good numbers for them. And just, overall, they're looking at almost 3.8 billion for the full year, of total adjusted earnings. And so look, it's done very well. And the big thing down here that they really highlighted, of course, was the free cash flow increase right here, a 78% jump in free cash flow. Now, for what people, if you don't understand what that means, is basically that is a huge key financial metric for any company. When you see an increase like that year over year, that's a tremendous change that affords a company a lot of flexibility to either not have to borrow as much money to, in this case, produce more TV shows, or if they want to borrow, it increases their capacity for leverage. They can borrow more. That's a big help for those companies.
They have money on hand. They have money.
Yeah.
I mean, and think about it on your practical level. I mean, you could be making a lot of money over the course gross over a year, but if it's given at specific chunks of time, you've got to manage the time in between, right? And so, screenwriters face this all the time. Artists face it all the time. I might get paid very large sum of money for a script I wrote, but I might not get paid out for 9 months. And so how do I bridge that time? Suddenly you end up taking bridge loans, you've run out of cash, whatever. And then by the time the money comes in, you're covering your credit cards, you're covering all the personal loans from family and friends, and suddenly it wasn't as big a money payout as you thought it was going to be because of how it all flowed. If you have this kind of cash flow, free cash flow, it gives you tremendous power day to day.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring up about the lag of time by which talent often gets paid, writers and everybody else, because that's a big key point in the Puck article as well. The change that I think that at least Matthew Maloney is anticipating from who he's talking to out in Hollywood, how all this is changing in Hollywood, especially with streaming productions. So, Kamran, give me some thoughts if you have any at this point. With David Zaslav, and you did a Patreon piece a few days ago, so we've kind of set up some of this information. So, walk us through that.
Well, yeah. So I did, as you mentioned, I wrote this on Patreon. The moment I saw it, I knew the importance of this article. So, he said some very specific words that are so simple, and yet they're not words that have been very much in the parlance at the level of the studios for a decade, unfortunately. Words like compete, right? I mean, that shows his mindset. He's an old school market capitalist, right? He's like, I'm here to compete. Right. My goal is he's going to have multiple streaming units. I mean, he's going to have Discovery Plus, HBo Max, and I think there's some smaller stuff in there as well. But that's the chunk of it. And now he's going to have those things. And his goal with these is to compete in the streaming wars. This is what you want to do in a war. And unfortunately, the word war is on all of our minds nowadays. But that's what you want to do. You want to actually compete. And he says, we're not here to win a spending war, because it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. To use examples from militaries, back some decades ago, remember there were some scandals about how some contractors were charging the Pentagon, $1 million for a hammer, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So on the books, it looks like we're throwing lots of money to maximize our defenses, but it's not wisely being used, right? It's not being properly used. That's a good analogy of how Hollywood has been behaving, for the last several years, is throwing millions of dollars on something that's not worth it, right? That is worth much less. Whereas this gentleman knows a hammer's worth $250. That's what I'm going to pay for it. Maybe if I can get it at $225, that's what I prefer to pay for it, right? And when that's how you use your resources, now you've got this guy who's got a company that has massive flowing cash in hand, who says, I'm not going to use that to become a drunken sailor. I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of lottery tickets. I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of alcohol or drugs. I have all this money flowing in my hand, and I'm going to get the best possible deals with all of it. That's basic common sense market capitalism. But that has not been prevalent in the last several years in some of the major players that we've seen. We've seen places like Viacom, Paramount, I don't know what they are now, so many different companies within that entity, right? And how they've, in many people's opinions, mishandled things like Star Trek by throwing lots of money at it without looking at what the content is and whether they're getting what they should for the resources that they're throwing at it. And one could argue the same with how Disney was handled in the Bob Iger regime. Disney Plus was a later thing, but earlier on, he became infamous for throwing lots of money, and not even lots of money like Mr. Zaslav has, which is free cash flow. He would go out, Mr. Iger would go out and take a credit card and say, I'm going to use this credit, I'm going to borrow all this money, and I'm going to buy Lucasfilm. I'm going to buy Pixar. And then I'm just going to not take any risks with it beyond that. So the risks were exactly the wrong place, which is the risks were in borrowing the money and then not using it strategically. Whereas Mr. Zaslav knows how to flip that around. It's like, I'm going to use the cash I've got. I'm going to be conservative on that. And then I'm going to be risk-taking in the sense of I'm going to look at what the marketplace wants, right? So it's the exact opposite flip, which is how entrepreneurs work, which is how this gentleman works. That's how you become profitable. So when he says compete, he means to win. I mean, that's his goal. We said, I don't need to win the spending war, because you don't win the spending war. You can win the spending war by taking all your money, putting it in a pile and setting it on fire. You've spent. You've won the spending war. You've beaten everybody else, right? That's not a victory. The victory is in the word compete. So, I mean, this to me, the moment I saw that, I put it on Patreon. I said, this guy is hitting the town with basic economics 101 Milton Friedman style, and he needs to go back to that.
That's a good. I like the Milton Friedman reference. That's a good one.
I'm a libertarian economically.
I'm a big fan of Mr. Friedman for many years.
This is my guy, but we'll have that conversation on the podcast.
Well, but you're right. But as far as the spending war is concerned, spending is fine, but like you said, you got to have something to show for it. And what I like about what David Zaslav is doing, this is going to be, like we talked about, he's taking that low risk, low budget type of television production with reality shows. You don't have to have a whole lot of skin in the game, and you can still have a very good audience, especially in the price to value relationship, what I've spent versus the audience and the ad revenue I'm getting in return. That's what you want. Okay. That's what's really important. And I think that's where he's trying to go with this, or at least I'd hope so, because it seems to me that if David Zaslav is wise enough to realize, look, not everything we make has to compete on a big budget scale. We don't have to, not every show that we make has to be some grandiose thing. It's fine to make, instead of one big $150 million production budget show like Disney tried with Beauty and the Beast. We'll get to that in a minute because that's in the Puck article. I'd rather make 5 or 6 $20 million budget shows with a season and get, collectively way more audience and return out of that. And like you said, we see that on Travel Channel, on Discovery, on Food Network, on HGTV, all those, whatever, they would have like 20 different channels that are part of that family. And you get them for $5 a month with ads with Discovery Plus. If you've cut the cord and you don't have cable. And if you don't want ads, it's $10 a month. And they're making a mint on these things. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I'm not, trying to suggest that I think he's going to radically alter the HBO Max Warner Brothers content. But I'm sure they're going to be taking a look at it and see where can we cut costs most effectively. And obviously, one of the things they're looking at is once these companies do merge, you're going to have a certain degree of inherent economies of scale, where you're not going to have a lot of duplicitous production departments or executive departments or things like that, because it's now one company. You don't need to have 2 CFOs. You don't need to have, multiple different production units. You still will have some, but I think some of those are going to kind of disappear or at least be blended together. And they're going to reduce the overall costs between the two of them, which in turn should make things more profitable if they don't then turn around and spend the money elsewhere frivolously.
And it will be the people from Discovery that are going to take those, roles where there's overlap, because they're the ones who Zaslav trusts, and they're the ones who know how he works. So that's what's going to happen. And so, I've worked with the Warner Brothers multiple times. I've worked with them on 3 different shows, and I've sold a pilot to them. So I know them well. I know Warner Brothers television particularly well. I can tell you there's already a mass exodus on the television side. A lot of executives I know who are very good executives are like, they know they're not going to survive what's coming. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's on the traditional TV side. We're not even talking yet about the streaming side of HBO Max. But definitely, I think HBO Max will go through similar convulsions. I think that there's going to be a lot of internal conversation. I won't say I would differ on you, but I'm going to take a more risky stance than you've taken, Valiant, on this. I do think there's going to be content changes at HBO Max. I think HBO Max has no sense of identity right now. HBO itself used to be Tiffany. And I think that was heavily damaged by the Game of Thrones finale. I think a lot of people lost faith in HBO. And then in the subsequent time, when you combine HBO Max, you got a lot of stuff like people are watching. Like, HBO is putting out King Kong, which I very much enjoyed. Right, it was a King Kong, all right. And then and now recently, as I'm out there doing my profession as a screenwriter, we're out there trying to pitch stuff, and my agents are like, we can't take that to HBO Max because that's a little too sophisticated. What do you mean sophisticated? Like, well, they're just looking for stuff like Gossip Girl right now. I'm like, again, that's fine if it was Warner Brothers Max, but this is HBO Max, so that's Gossip Girl and HBO linked name. The quality has quite substantially declined and has damaged the brand. I think Mr. Zaslav, while he's not someone that is afraid of doing quote unquote what people would call schlock, right? As long as it's entertaining schlock, I think he knows that HBO has, every company needs to have a Tiffany element to it that they're proud of, right? And so I think content will be adjusted there.
I think there's going to be some, but I think largely, I guess, we're not going to see like all of a sudden HBO Max become, and this is more of what I was getting into, we're not going to see them turn into a giant swath of reality programming. I think they're going to leave that on the Discovery side. I think HBO Max going forward he's going to want to see them focus on getting back to, they're sitting on a very valuable piece of intellectual property that has, to this point, in my opinion, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, has gone very poorly used, and that is the DC universe. That has been at best.
But that can be Tiffany if it is done properly, and many would argue that it has not been done properly in the past decade. But that can be just like Marvel is Tiffany for Disney. That can be that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at is that I feel like at best, and I'm not trying to say that everything that they pumped out has been terrible. It hasn't, but it's been, I think at best, it's been a very mixed bag. I don't think it's turned out to be. They expected their DC universe to rival the MCU, and it hasn't ever come close.
Yeah, and again, but it comes down to that issue of, I would suggest, quality control.
Yeah,
I mean,
I would agree.
Yeah, because the material is there to make it high quality. It's there.
Oh, definitely. But they've got to get out of this. You kind of want to go through the whole, Snyderverse versus all this.
But their strategy hasn't worked. And I do think, again, from a purely profit perspective, Mr. Zaslav will look at that and go, this stuff's worth, again, if he's like, this stuff isn't worth that, he's like, well, this stuff is worth more than this. Wonder Woman is worth more than this, right? Superman is worth more than this. Okay. So let's get it there.
Yeah. They have a lot they can do with this, and he's got to listen to the audiences. I mean, people, you want to do Superman at this point, I think audiences across the board have made it clear. It's got to be Henry Cavill. You got to get him back. That's what they want to see.
Just give him a good script.
Exactly. Give him a good script. But on that note, and this is where things got a little bit more fun about 24 hours or so after this article came out from Puck, from Matthew Baloney. And if you haven't checked it out, we'll leave a link in the description below. This is at puck.news. They do have some stuff on their website that is on the free side. They also have more content that is behind a subscription paywall. Just, full disclosure, I do subscribe to Puck. I have paid them a subscription because I think, while I may not necessarily agree with everything, I think the quality of the work, especially in the Hollywood stuff, which is the part of their site that I really pay attention to, I think has done some good stuff. And I have spoken with Mr. Baloney privately some weeks ago, and I did talk to him about permission to use some of these articles that are behind the paywall to discuss on a stream, and he said that was perfectly fine. So here we go. We're going to talk about this one because it relates directly to what we were just speaking on. Disney has a weakness in the streaming wars. I mean, I was going to say that's a hell of a headline. Go ahead, Cameron.
No, I just wanted to add one more thing is that, and again, I think Puck is very clear about its politics. It's very opinionated about very things, but it's breaking news now. Now they're getting a lot of attention because they actually broke the news about who is likely going to be the new CEO or the new worldwide president of CNN after Jeff Zucker has been pushed out. But that's for another video. But it is a credible website when it comes to breaking information. So this particular article, I think, is worth looking at.
Yeah, and they have been following that Jeff Zucker story. They've had a lot of behind-the-scenes information on Puck that I have not seen anywhere else for the last several weeks since that whole Zucker thing went down, which, of course, is related to Mr. Zaslav because it's now going to be basically up to him to, help steer CNN back to, some sense of respectability in the news world and profitability, especially. So let's look at this. Disney has a weakness in the streaming wars. Heck of a headline here. The costly implosion of the Disney Plus Beauty and the Beast prequel reveals the pressure on legacy studios to bring massive IP-driven shows to streaming. So why hasn't Disney branded TV division had more breakout hits? So it's a long article. I'm not going to read every part of it, but just to kind of give you an idea of who Matt Baloney is and how he works. Coming from the article here, I met a big talent lawyer for a drink on Tuesday. This is from February 25th. And the first thing out of his mouth was, quote, "Man, can you believe how much money people are making?" That's a common refrain around Hollywood, and it's a shift in my experience. And again, Mr. Baloney is an attorney in Hollywood. He's an entertainment attorney. From the usual tone among representatives. Agents, managers, especially lawyers like to be about cheap buyers, about who is totally screwing their clients and how hard it is for talented people to get their fair deal in this town. In some ways, being upset is kind of their job. But these days, it's harder to complain. Sure, there are anxieties over things like the long-term viability of the streaming business, the vanishing profit participations. We've talked about that here on Valiant Renegade, like with movies, the back end deals on these big budget productions that they put out in the theaters, they still have to pay talent on the back end. This is changing. This is not the case anymore in streaming.
It's also
obviously
true on television. And Netflix. I mean, that's my bread and butter. Netflix spearheaded that because Netflix created a model where they would pay you 2 or 3 times your normal quote for your annual television salary, right? But you would lose any long-term residuals, royalties, which you may over time, especially if the show's a hit, may end up not being in your favor, that deal. While somebody like, I just made $1 million this year on this show. Well, over 10 years, you might have made 1.5 million from the residuals if it was a hit, right? So it's not necessarily always the right, but that's the new system they put in place.
Yeah, and that's why I think they're doing it. Is a lot of these production houses, they need to take the long-term risk, the long-term financial risk off, and agents apparently are happy because they're getting, obviously, just like the talent is, they're getting a bigger upfront paycheck, but there is a cost on the backside of this thing.
And agents don't commission agents don't commission the royalties, so they're not incentivized to preserve that system.
I was going to ask you that, and I had a feeling if that was the case. So
they were very happy because they get this upfront chunk, and 5 years from now, that client may no longer be with that agency, but they got paid out, and that client's not getting royalties, but they got more than they would have. And so the agencies are now incentivized to follow this new system that the streamers have set up.
Yeah. So that is good to know, because I was kind of wondering if the agents would only get that upfront pop or if they did get residual. So that explains. So here we go to what we were just talking about. All of this will end at some point. He's talking about the quote, "These are the good old days of Hollywood. Get used to them because they're a changing, folks." Given Wall Street's recent interest in business fundamentals and leaders incoming like Warner Brothers Discovery, David Zaslav saying things like, "Our goal is to compete with the leading streaming services, not to win the spending war. As the new digital oligopoly establishes itself, the also-rans will either be consolidated or fall away." And one of them he mentioned specifically kind of chuckles a little bit at things like Paramount Plus. It's like they think they're competing with Disney and Netflix, and he's like, they ain't. So
yeah, well, I mean, that whole conglomerate is in chaos, so they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's kind of the ones. And I've said this before. I think I said this when I did the video on Paramount about a week ago, and I said, look, they're ripe for somebody like an Apple or an Amazon to step in and just gobble them up. And I think they would leave the linear broadcast. It would be kind of like the Fox Disney deal. They would leave the linear broadcast behind. I don't think they want to fool with that. Amazon and Apple doesn't want to be in that business, but they would take the library. They would take the streaming service. They would take the content, and they would pay billions, tens of billions for that. And again, this is kind of funny. As a result, the total amount spent, here we go. But until then, in the roaring 20s, the 2020s, where Disney will spend $33 billion this year, according to Wells Fargo analysts. And then Paramount is still pretending it can compete with Disney, and where the talent community seems to have decided that taking huge sums of money up front is preferable to fighting to save back-end compensation systems that defined the linear television era. As a result, the total amount spent on worldwide content this year will hit a record $230 billion, according to research analytics firms Ampere. That is including sports rights, but 10 years ago, the total spend was half of that. And yeah, live sports obviously is probably at least 40% of that figure. Sports rights they cost a fortune because they bring in the highest amount of advertising revenue. Yeah. But like he says here in the next paragraph, totally normal now when Apple snatches a $200 million Brad Pitt film package from rival bidders, throws a $40 million check at George Clooney given the market. NBC Universal was forced to commit $400 million without a single script to get 3 films based on The Exorcist. So, and then Netflix, of course, stole for almost $450 million. Netflix stole the 2 Knives Out sequels from Lionsgate. And that means, and I love this line, Daniel Craig will likely get paid more money for these 2 small budgets films, these Knives Out films, than he did from playing James Bond.
And who also will benefit? Our beloved. And who also will benefit? Our beloved Ryan Johnson is behind the Knives Out. He's worth a few $100 million just from this deal.
Oh, absolutely. God bless him. So
let me comment on that.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say,
because it's going to link back to our conversation about David Zaslav, right? Which is that, look, this is the example we're talking about, throwing money like drunken sailors. But notice who's getting it. It's people that I call on my Patreon, and I call publicly the club. It's the people that are associated, with a certain level of prestige within the industry, and people like George Clooney and Mr. Johnson, who was able to create some prestige for himself, at least within the industry, if not perhaps with the fan base, right? And all of these characters, and so it's the same old people. It's the same old people, and these are people just it's like Marie Antoinette, just give me more cake, right? And so and they're getting it, and so it's this. But they represent, names like George Clooney. Is Mr. God bless him, great actor. Is George Clooney really the force behind the future of Hollywood right now? Is that where the generational storytelling is going? And so that's just throwing money at famous people because it's all you know how to do. The ultimate example of that, which we haven't even mentioned yet, is this Lord of the Rings, God, whatever, what is prequel, right? That Amazon is doing. And it's not even famous people involved in that. In fact, it's quite the opposite, but it's people that are all connected to J.J. Abrams, who is the famous person behind the scenes, right? And so that's being given $1 billion. And so you're seeing where the money is being spent. It's being spent on that old guard who I have argued for some time, and I've argued on your channel, Valiant, their day is over, and they just don't know it. But the rise of Mr. Zaslav, who'd be looking at like, why am I spending $200 million on George Clooney? Why? Maybe I should be spending $20 million on this lesser known actor who's going to bring me $20 million profit, and then do 10 of those. All right, let's do that.
Yep, that's exactly it, and that's what I was getting at. I think he's looking at economies of scale. I think he's looking at total return on investment, and that means that spending the most money is not always the right thing to do. Hiring the most expensive actor or most expensive director or most expensive this or that, or putting in, $50, $60, $70 million of post-production CGI or whatever the case, whatever, is that you can make audiences happy without breaking the bank. And that's what this article from Puck is all about, is recognizing this. And I haven't seen anybody else write it to this extent. They really kind of cover it in the way that Mr. Baloney does. But he goes on to say right here, again, he's talking about this Beauty and the Beast thing. Now, he put the number on here as $150 million is what Disney had greenlit for this. Yeah. And that they were 2 to 3 scripts into this. And then
I want to comment on that because I know the players involved personally.
Okay. Let's set this up real quick with this brief little summary here. From the article, this is Matt Baloney. I thought of that pressure when I saw Disney recently pulling the plug on Beauty and the Beast. It had already been delayed several times, supposed to shoot this summer in order to air on Disney Plus in 2023. There was a time not that long ago when it would be major news that a studio poured 3 years and tens of millions of dollars. That's already sunk costs, folks. That's spent. That's done. It's gone.
That's money that's been burned on the bonfire.
That's right. Into a TV project that never shot a single day of film. We'd all debate what went wrong and speculate about the fallout for talent and executives involved. But in this overheated market where similar $150 million projects are routinely greenlit and rushed to streaming to juice those quarterly subs, the Beast implosion kind of just came and went. Just an expensive vase that fell off a packed conveyor belt. Breakage. And he's right. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if something like that happened, people would have had heads cut off, the fire and everything else. Their houses burned to the ground. I'm in Hollywood. I'm being facetious figuratively, but this is like today. It's like meh.
Well, but it's more than meh in this situation. Let's talk about the characters because they're highlighted here because I know 2 of them.
Yep.
So we look at the people involved. So we've got this here. I'm going to read it. I'm not too interested in who's at fault here. Some projects work, some don't. After talking with all sides, it seems that Disney was just disappointed with the second and third scripts from Josh Gad, Eddie Kitsis, and Adam Horowitz, and original music from Alan Menken. I don't know Mr. Gad. I don't know Mr. Menken. I do know Mr. Kitsis and Mr. Horowitz. They were my bosses. They were my bosses on Tron Uprising, right? And they fired me from Tron Uprising. Okay, so I know them quite well. And I don't think I need to put the caveat on. There's probably some not great feelings there because of my experience with them, but I'll give you an analysis here. I'm not shocked that these scripts were not up to par based on my experience. These are gentlemen that rose up from the world. They are from the J.J. Abrams camp. Yet again, I mentioned this one overarching. It's like the Dark Lord. Wherever you go, J.J. Abrams shows up, right? And so you've got J.J. These are J.J. Abrams proteges that rose up as staff writers essentially on Lost, right? And from the success of Lost, and one can argue whether that success was earned or not, but that was a successful show, which with perhaps a disappointing finale, much like Game of Thrones. And from that, everyone that came out of there, who were all proteges of Mr. Abrams and his protege Damon Lindelof, were very, very successful. They were the club that I referred to, right, where everyone just threw money at them. There's another gentleman, Carlton Cuse. Whenever I've been up for projects the last decade, he'd be like, "You didn't get it, Carlton Cuse got it," because he's from that Lost crowd, right? And so it would be given to them. So these gentlemen then went on to create several shows for ABC, and they were very successful in that. I will not make it personal, but I'm not startled about the quality of the scripts issue. And I will say that when I left Tron, I pointed out that I thought the show would end under the way the leadership was being structured, and it did end. It did not. It was supposed to be a very successful franchise, beginning of a franchise for Disney, and it was not. It was canceled in the first season, as I warned them would happen. So let's just say I came away with a personal opinion that perhaps there was a lot of glitter there that was not gold. That everyone's like, well, it's a Kitsis and Horowitz production, and based on my experience, I'd say, well, I'm not so sure that's a selling point. Right. But, for a decade more, they continued their rise to power, and became incredibly successful. God bless them, very wealthy. I wish them all the success in the world. But I'm not startled that a day would come when the industry dynamics, the pressure start building, the finances, when you can no longer just throw money at the J.J. Abrams crowd if you're not getting the end result. And it is not surprising to me that now that Susan Arnold is officially the new chairman and Bob Chapek is free of the Bob Iger shadow that was hanging over him, that one of the very first things they do is cut this thing, even though it's, $150 million sunk cost under the previous regime. They cut it because they knew they would be dealing with a $300 million sunk cost and a loss. They knew what was coming based on the quality of the material. And the quality of the material, these scripts were around last year. And the quality of the material that these people have done has been known for quite some time, right? But when you're in the club, no one can question whether you're actually good at what you do and whether the material is worthy of the money you're being given, right? Because you're in the club. This moment here was a shattering moment for the club, because this shouldn't happen to J.J. Abrams' proteges. This should not happen to people that have been highly, elevated within the Disney ABC system for almost 20 years, right? The fact that now people are willing to openly say something that doesn't startle me, that several scripts were not very good after putting $150 million into it.
And I don't know if they spent all that. That's just what they budgeted for. But they certainly spent, they spent, according to this, 10, 20, maybe 30.
Fine. Yeah. 10, 20, 30 million, but $10 million. 3 scripts at $10 million, not being good, not a good return.
That's 3 seasons of Mountain Monsters, y'all.
Yeah, it's not a good return. It's not a good return by any 3 seasons of Mountain, maybe even 4. So with that, the very fact that we're now having this conversation in Puck, which is really an up and coming news site at this point,
agreed,
and we're bluntly stating this, means the beginning of the end of an era. It is now the point that they're being publicly castigated, forgive me, for not producing at the quality level, which after 20 years of experience in this town, you would think that should not be a problem, right? But then you would actually have to have gone through 20 years of rejection, failure, and learning your craft as a result of response to not succeeding, which is many artists like myself have had to do, right? It's called, what Mr. Zaslav said, competition. The only reason I'm still here, Valiant, after 20 years, is that I've learned to compete. There's a lot of people that don't want me in this town, and I've been very open about that. A lot of personal reasons. People don't like me, my personality. They don't like my politics. They don't like my religion, whatever. I don't fit into their club. However, I'm still here. I'm still working. I'm still getting paid to do this because I have no choice but to produce extraordinary work, because there's nothing there protecting me. No one trying to say, let's give Cameron a chance. No one is trying to say that. So I have to compete like David Zaslav. I don't have the choice of saying, give me $10 million, give me $20 million. I'll write something. I don't have that power. Maybe one day I will, and hopefully I'll use it wisely, but I don't have that power. I have to compete. And that is the moment we're facing here, where something is not competitive and they have to face it.
Yeah, it seems like to me as a layman for all this that there's a lot of old guard names out there that have just been resting on their names and their laurels for a long time. And it's interesting when you see, and even I know the names Adam Horowitz. I don't know Eddie Kitsis, but I knew I knew Horowitz, and I've heard of that before a number of times. And again, as you see names like this, and it's like, how do you get this project to this point, and then it's still falling on its face, and it seems like to this end, it's all but been abandoned at this moment. So what do you do? What do you do? I mean, now the article kind of continues on to go here. They're talking about they had sets being built in London. They had moved Josh Gad's start date for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids back to accommodate the principal photography of Beauty and the Beast this summer, which again is now off the table. It's just, but they have guaranteed stuff. It's at least Gad and co-star Luke Evans are pay or play according to sources, meaning they're owed six-figure guaranteed episodes. So it's
walk off with a good payout. And those deals again were all structured when by the agents to maximize their own money. That makes perfect sense. And again, no one questioned it because you didn't expect this to be a payer-player situation because it's the club. These are people that are highly regarded within the structural system, and so why wouldn't it go under the Iger regime that they were building all these sets and doing all of these things under the Bob Iger regime only a few months ago? There would not, under Bob Iger, who loved the club, he loved the cocktail parties, he loved the glamour of it, right? He would love being around the popular cool kids, and the idea that this thing wasn't going to make any money never mattered to him. He went ahead with it all the way until someone says, "This isn't going to make any money. We got to stop this."
Yeah. This is one of these things, and this brings us up to the point you're making. I was trying to find this section. Yeah. Disney has been busy for the past few weeks absorbing Fox, reorganizing itself for streaming under Bob Chapek, and insiders are telling Matt that various reorganizations and divvying of responsibilities have made the development process more challenging, especially on the TV side. The decisions, financial approvals, and where shows will appear were separated from the development executives and turned over to Kareem Daniel, the new head of distribution at Disney.
All right, well, that says everything you need to know, because that means it's the development executives that are used to, because they've been trained for the last 20 years.
We're going to focus on distribution now, guys.
Exactly. It's like, well, here's the creative stuff. And, you're from the J.J. Abrams club. Whatever you got to say is golden. Of course we're going to do that, right? Because everyone wants to be the cool club at the party. And the development executives, my own experience having worked with such executives on Tron Uprising, were that, let's say, storytelling and the success of the project were not as important as being allied with the right people, right? There was one executive, I won't name the person, but I would remember walking by, because at Tron, here's a little bit of dish. So I would walk by their office all the time because we were in the Disney main buildings, and and going to my writer's room, I would walk by there, and their door was always open. They're having conversations on the phone all the time when I walked by. And I never once heard them having a conversation about story or, we got to give notes on this, or all I ever heard, and I swear, was talking to their secretary and saying, "Can you get me front row seats to the Lakers? Can you connect me to this cool party? Can you get me in with this thing? I got to get into this nice Democratic convention, dinner thing." That's all I ever heard from that room. And this is one of the development executives. I'm like, you want to talk? I never hear we have to talk about Act 3. That was never a voice coming out of that room. It was all about the cool kids. I got to be in the cool club. Make sure I'm in the cool club. And that's the kind of people that this was taken away from.
Yeah, and it sounds like, again, and we've mentioned, Cameron and I have mentioned the name Kareem Daniel before in our discussions, because when he was brought in some months ago by Chapek, or when he was announced, this was playing into that, like I was joking with earlier, we're going back to a distribution-focused model. Kareem Daniel, apparently now, he is the guy. He is making the decisions on, apparently, not only what is going to get made and what isn't, but where it's going to go. So all these recent news articles about the decision to, pull the Pixar movies and put them on Disney Plus and not have them in the theater, Kareem Daniel. We're going to stop a show from being produced that's going to be on Disney Plus, like Beauty and the Beast. It's Kareem Daniel. So the buck is stopping there with him. Chapek has put his faith into him to make the decisions to basically follow what the audience is looking for, not only what they're looking for, but where they want to see it, where they feel like they can maximize their return for a given production, whether it's going to be if we put it in the theater, if we put it on Disney Plus. Case in point, Cameron, look at what they just did with Encanto. Encanto had a very poor box office reception when it released. They gave it a 30-day window.
Regrettably, because I understand it's a good film.
That's what I've heard too. And they put it on Disney Plus on Christmas Eve. It did not do that well in the theater, especially when compared to its big budget of about $150 million. But when it got on Disney Plus, it became a super mega hit almost overnight. The watch time they had on it, it broke into the top 10 of the Nielsen ratings. They had one or two of their songs suddenly hit #1 on the Billboard charts or stuff like that, which is fantastic.
The right choice. It was the right choice to do this.
It was, and now they have announced, my understanding is they're putting it back into theaters for a limited time because they've created the buzz. It's kind of like The Greatest Showman a few years ago with Hugh Jackman, where
which I enjoyed tremendously.
I did too. Yeah, it hit the theaters. It did like $8 million its opening weekend, but it stayed in theaters for 52 weeks because of the music.
People are telling me because the reviews were
$400 million that thing closed out at.
I read the reviews. I was like, I'm going to go see this. It looks like garbage, right? And then everyone's like, man, you got to check it out. It's so much fun. After I kept hearing it, I went to see it. I was like, what's happening here? What are these reviews in this actual movie that's so entertaining?
Yeah, I think I actually saw it on opening weekend. I went with my wife, who, of course, is a music teacher, so that was right up her alley. She wanted to go see it, and I was like, I was really surprised. I'm like, okay, this was a lot better than I anticipated.
Yeah, it was a heartwarming story. It was great.
But it goes to show you what can happen with this. Last piece in here I thought was interesting, and I want to find real quick because there's a lot more to this. But I found here we go. Talking about, again, how the payouts work. And Cameron, I don't know if you caught this section of it. Okay. This goes to the specifics, and this will be the final topic here. So it also, they're talking about how people perceive Disney as being cheap when it comes to paying talent. This is a situation across the board, apparently.
They are. I can tell you that is true. They always were, long before Bob Chapek.
Oh yeah. This is old news, folks.
For the normal talent, not for the club talent, right? You know, they will always pay, at least in the past, certain people an exorbitant sum.
Yeah, and this goes into this. Disney is known among deal makers to be cheaper than its rivals, generally treats talent much worse on projects based on its own IP than it does so-called originals. And this talks about going from the residual base that we were talking about now to fixed upfront compensation system. Just like, and that's what he's saying here, the goal is for Disney to come closer to Netflix's fixed compensation and move away from sliding profit participation back in deals and all that kind of stuff. Because again, it is much more financially predictable for any large company to just have, we know this is going to cost us this much and we're done, right? And they can walk away. But it also dissuades a certain class of creator from wanting to work with Disney. And they talk about some of that, fee for service, no back end, no buyout, no bonuses. This is what I thought was interesting, Cameron. Sure, there are exceptions. Favreau originally signed on to do just one season of Mando. Jon Favreau, folks. So when it became Disney Plus's signature series, he extracted an insane deal to continue.
Good for him.
All kinds of bonuses and incentives for writing or directing individual episodes. But I'm betting even Favreau doesn't get a cut of the show's merchandise revenue, which I'm probably not, meaning Disney doesn't likely share any of the windfall from Baby Yoda, T-shirts, PJs, right, along with Filoni, who actually created the character. Favreau's representative declined to comment on this, I'm sure.
No, well, I know for a fact they would not. I mean, I know for a fact they would not, because when you join Disney, you sign a lengthy thing, which I did, which basically says anything you come up with while you're here, such as, here's a new idea for a toothbrush, belongs to Disney, right?
Right.
While you're employed here, everything that's coming out of your head, they're already contractually obligated to somebody else, right? Belongs to us. And so, Baby Yoda never belonged to Dave Filoni.
Right. Or Fab, right. And that's what they're getting at. But my point is that it goes to show what you and I have talked about here a number of times, is that the clout that Favreau has with Disney. He is one of probably, and maybe the only guy, the creator at Disney, that they contract. Well, it's not, and again, Favreau's not an employee of Disney. They contract his creative company, which you'll find on the credits, at least on IMDb, for all the shows like Mando, which is Gollum Creations LLC. That's Favreau's company. That's Favreau's production company. So they pay Gollum Creations LLC for Jon Favreau to come in and do his thing. But it goes to show that Favreau is able to extract a lot more performance-based incentives from Disney for the stuff he does, because it's not just Star Wars, it's all the other stuff he's done, setting up the MCU, Lion King, Jungle Book, all that. I mean, that's made Disney
earned leverage.
Load of money. Yeah.
It's not being a member of a club, it's earned leverage. He's got
and that's what I say, he has their ear. And he can pretty much do or say at Disney whatever he needs. Now, even though he may not be able to say things publicly, he definitely is in constant contact with people like the Kareem Daniels, with the Alan Bergmans and the Chapeks and all that. They love Favreau over there. Okay.
They can take his calls immediately. You want to be one of the people that the moment the call comes, you tell the powerful person, "Doctor, I'm sorry, I have to take this. I'll be back." And that he's one of those guys when his call comes.
Yep. Yep. Very interesting stuff. I would encourage everybody to check out Puck Magazine, and I'll kind of want to wind this down. Cameron, any final thoughts before we check out today?
My final thoughts are I'm so hopeful. This is exactly the kind of thing that I expected and I wanted to see, and now we are seeing it, and now it's being shared throughout the traditional trades, and now these upstarts like Puck are really doing really detailed analysis of it, which is that we're in a new era, my friends. We saw the beginnings of that era with the slow and steady rise of Bob Chapek and Susan Arnold, and people are disappointed they haven't been able to fix everything, and it's going to be a long time here. But we're now going to see that accelerated era with David Zaslav. He's going to come in with a lightsaber and just cut everything out of the way. That's who he is. That's how he's become a massive success, that he can buy Warner Media and he has this that he can have the head of CNN removed. That's a man with power and a man with a vision. And the vision is not about transforming culture to reflect his personal values. His vision is, what are the values of the culture and how can I strengthen them and profit from that? And that's exactly what we needed at this time, right? And this is a wonderful moment that was slow and steady and now is going to rapidly accelerate.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think this last line or two from this article from Puck really kind of hits it home, just based on the dynamic, because we know what kind of guy Zaslav is. We haven't really seen what Chapek's going to look like with Disney Plus over the next 2, 3, 4 years. But what Mr. Baloney says here is that if Disney wants to supercharge the output from, say, its branded unit in this market, it kind of needs to do it now. It might be worth shelling out to pair more top-level creators with the studio's trove of characters and stories. After all, it's a seller's market these days, and as my lawyer friend noted, there's just so much money to be made. The pressure is on Disney to grow, and it needs not just the best IP, but the best talent to do it. So
we go back to the word compete. We go back to the word compete. The best talent means not just the talent with the right name. It means the person that can compete.
Exactly. And with that, folks, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this sucker out on the social medias if you enjoyed it. And, of course, do leave a comment before you check out. And until next time, take care.